members of the press that are here. We thank you for coming out to our press conference today, and we thank those of you, apart from your busy schedules, you have decided to tune in. I want to especially acknowledge our political leader and leader of the opposition in the House of Assembly, Honorable Alan Chasney, who's also the current member for the Micoud South constituency. This morning, it is with great sadness, disappointment, and trepidation that we come to address you on this rather important issue afflicting many families of our nation at this time. The persistingly high crime rate, which is affecting all of us in so many ways, which is causing anxiety, which is causing us to feel unsafe in our own homes and villages. When we have just concluded the Gina Creole season, when we hear bamboo bursting, we have to take precautionary action because we don't know whether it was another gunshot. And so we speak to you in the aftermath of what I would describe as the most uninspiring Prime Minister's address that this nation has seen in the history of its founding since 1979. The Prime Minister of our country, Honorable Philip J. Pierre, came to try to allay our fears. But instead of allaying our fears, he caused more panic, more anxiety, more sadness, more frustration, and he declined and suppressed the hope that we all wish that a leadership speech would make us feel. We speak to you on the aftermath of 4 unfortunate citizens being executed in 3 days' time. We speak to you as several businesses continue to be robbed. Their security costs are piling up. We speak to you as families grieve, as children are left motherless, and mothers on almost a weekly occasion cry at the news of losing a loved one. One mother could be heard on television saying, "I never thought I would ever have to bury my son." This encapsulates the issue that faces us at this present time. But instead, the Prime Minister could have been publicly heard on separate occasions saying, "The sky is not falling," or "We should not unduly cause fear in our community." But I have some news for the Prime Minister. There is fear. There is panic. It is your responsibility. I listened with much amazement and disappointment that the police are continuously blamed, that the responsibility has been left on the police to solve this matter. The Prime Minister's speech had a very strong chorus of it being business as usual. But I want to quote Dr. Martin Luther King, who said that in times of crisis, there needs to be an urgency of now. And I hope that the Prime Minister is familiar with that quote, because it is not business as usual in this country. It is not normal times. And so when we listen to the speech, we hear and we see that everything is futuristic. The Prime Minister said that we will, or his government is contemplating or considering, or cabinet will discuss, all futuristic, rather than telling us what is he going to do now to solve this problem now. And so I'm very sorry. The speech could be best described as vacuous, as empty, as insufficient to give us hope and to inspire all of us that our government is on top of this situation. And so instead of telling us that you're going to construct police stations and you're going to build halls of justices, all of those are good things. But what are you going to do now is the question that looms large, is the question that befalls all of us. And we are looking for answers. The bus drivers who have decided that they are going to not ply certain routes after sunset are looking for answers. The passengers who are left stranded on a daily basis because the bus drivers have decided not to ply those routes after hours are looking for answers, Mr. Prime Minister. The business owners who are robbed on almost a weekly business, they are looking for answers. The mothers who are having to watch coffins go into graves are looking for answers, but none can be found. During his address, the Prime Minister also erroneously told the nation that the country, and I quote verbatim from his speech, that the country is experiencing one of the that we have recorded some of our best tourism figures. Nothing could be further from the truth. Mr. Prime Minister, the SLTA, St. Lucia Tourism Authority's report, year-to-date 2019, as of August, which is the latest report that's in circulation, would have showed that stayover arrivals would have been at 298,723, compared to 242,547. This organization, your government, is 50,000 less than where guests coming to our hotels would have been, or at least about 20% less than where we were in hotel guests. In cruise arrivals, it is even more damning for your administration, because while at this time we were at 507,293 cruise passengers, your administration, as of August, you've only had 125,000, so way below the halfway mark. In the yachting sector, of which crime has a tremendous implication, there were 47,673 yacht arrivals into St. Lucia as of August 2019. As of August 2022, your administration presided over 11,441, or 36,000 less, at least 75% less than where it was in 2019. It is no secret to people in the yachting sector that our yachtsmen are already avoiding certain bays and anchorages that should be at their optimal potential, that should derive more economic opportunity for members of those community. But we are failing to see that because the tourism sector are continuously worried and anxious about the crime situation in this country. Over the years, the industry has dealt with this matter by sweeping incidents of crime under the carpet that have been committed against tourists. And the specific hotels and the industry generally are very concerned about the fact that if it is exposed that, an incident of crime occurred against a guest staying at their hotel, that it will have a negative implication on business. And so believe you me when I tell you that there is an urgency of now. Believe you me when I tell you that many jobs in the tourism sector are at risk because of this crime situation, that many farmers are at risk of losing their supply contracts to the hotels because of this crime situation. Believe you me when I tell you that many taxi drivers who depend on taking tourists to various locations around our country are at risk of losing their daily lives because of this crime situation. Believe you me when I tell you that government taxes are at risk because of this crime situation. And so the Prime Minister cannot come and give us a glossy speech and to sugarcoat this issue and to tell us that his administration is doing this and doing that. So the cruise industry and the hotel sector are already not dealing with certain small tours and attractions. In fact, now if you ask a lot of the small businesses that the SLP administration is trying to promote in their new mantra of community tourism, that unless they have public liability insurance of minimum $1 million US coverage, in a lot of instances, they require $2 million US in public liability insurance coverage before the industry will deal with them. This is because of the increased liability that has come about on community tourism because of a prevailing crime situation that this government is putting a band-aid on. Blaming the police is not enough. Saying that you bought vehicles for the police is not enough. It is a fundamental mistake on the part of this administration to have cancelled the contract for the K9 units. This has proven to be a very successful endeavor where the sniffer dogs have actually intercepted not just drugs coming to our country, but they have been able to intercept a lot of illegal guns coming into our country. I was quite appalled, shocked, and surprised to hear the Prime Minister say that his government will spare no effort to investigate and to eliminate incidents of corruption. Listen to me well. Corruption within the police force. What is it that the Prime Minister have on our police force that he's not sharing with the public? But if you are going to make such an accusation against hard-working individuals that are trying their best on a daily basis with very skeletal resources, with police stations that are not up to par, with not the best resources, and you are now going to accuse them publicly of being corrupt, Mr. Prime Minister? That is you trying to pass the buck and not taking responsibility for this situation? I was very shocked that this was announced in a speech. And so therefore, the situation is not getting any better. The situation is not getting any good. The Prime Minister is also on record of saying that crime is a regional pandemic. And it wasn't during the last address, but he was quoted on other stations where we saw in the interview of a popular morning program. And he cited one of the worst Caribbean sister islands where they have known for decades to have a prevailing crime problem, but refused to mention the smaller islands of the OACS. And if you crowd St. Lucia with them, you will see that the stats in those islands would declare St. Lucia the homicide capital of the OACS islands. And so trying to use statistics and trying to divert the issue from fixing the problem is not going to cut it, Mr. Prime Minister. It's not going to deal with the issues. Trying to blame the police is not the answer for this cancer that's eating away at the fabric of our very country, Mr. Prime Minister. And so I was very disappointed by taking time out from family activities on a Sunday to listen to the head of our government address the nation on a very, very important issue. He also continued that he said that the crime situation, his government was going to implement some social safety nets to deal with this problem. And he mentioned that they were going to cut overhead hanging bushes, they were going to clean roadside verges, and they were going to clean drains. Now that sounds more like a Christmas step program for political hacks than it is a crime intervention or a social safety net. And then the very next line, he moved on to his favorite line in the speech, "My government will," and start speaking about a number of futuristic things that they will do during the Christmas season. But the Prime Minister, recognizing that his record on social safety nets, whether it is dealing with the problem of the high cost of living, which is no doubt having untold damages on many families and on many young people of this country, then skip the buck. No word of the $1,500 in income support that he has promised the people of this country. Not a single word. No comprehensive plan to let the people of St. Lucia know when gas prices are going to be reduced. No plan to tell us when the price of cooking gas will be reduced from its current price of over $45 for a 20-pound cylinder that's gripping the poorest of the poor, the marginalized citizens of this country. I want to quote some stats for you from the Minister of Social Equity. And he was speaking just recently in the Parliament, and he told us that not only do we have an unemployment rate at 21%, but we also have a youth unemployment rate of 37%, the Social Economic Review will show. Now just imagine 37% of the young people of this country unemployed. Just imagine what this is causing to the crime situation. The Prime Minister has failed to implement or to give us any signal that his government is going to institute a economic growth problem that can create jobs for the young people of this country. And so if I was a young person unemployed watching the Prime Minister's speech, the speech would have driven in me more frustration than it gave me hope. And that is the crux of the matter. This was an uninspiring, this was an inadequate performance by the leader of our country. And so I'm sorry, we will continuously advocate for the government to deal with these matters, right? And so we presented to them a 6-point plan as to how to deal with it, because during COVID, many citizens lost their jobs. And the United Workers' Party regime, we had a lot of practice in terms of how to deal with an economic crisis that was brought on by a global pandemic. And in doing so, we were able to reduce the impact. We give NIC support to 11,000 unemployed persons via NIC. And then we got monies borrowed from the World Bank and other donor agencies or international financial agencies, IFIs they're referred to as. And there was another 6 or 7 million that covered 6,000 unregistered workers of this country. Now, the Prime Minister boasted in his speech that they are seeing a record number of NIC registrants. That came about because of the program by the United Workers' Party. He refused to tell the nation that, because we engage and we showed empathy and sympathy. And during the pandemic, many self-employed persons who weren't registered with NIC had the opportunity to really realize that one day you will get old, one day you will fall sick. And so the need is, and COVID showed them, that the need was for them to become registered with the NIC. And so really, I want to say that crime has become the new COVID in this country. It has reached pandemic proportions, and we must act now. I want to close by empathizing and sympathizing with all of the families who have lost loved ones, who we continue to be saddened by your own tears on television. Those mothers who haven't had closure yet as a result of an inadequate justice system. Those fathers who are without favorite sons, and those brothers and sisters who miss loved ones. We want to we want to say to you that our prayers are with you and our deepest sympathy are with you. And we understand why, instead of giving you hope, that on Sunday you were even more saddened and despaired. I thank you very much. With these words, we will take questions later, but I want to open up the floor now for my political leader and the leader of the opposition to address you on a number of salient topics that is affecting our country at this rather pressing and difficult time. I give to you the Honorable Alan Shasney.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, let me just reinforce some of the statements that Mr. Dominic Fede, the Honorable Dominic Fede, shared with us. One, that the Prime Minister's speech, particularly at this time, given what we know, where not only are we on the verge of breaking our homicide record, not a record that you really want to break, but the state of violence that currently ensues in St. Lucia. And specifically, he spoke about the types of murders, cold-blooded murders that are taking place, that are non-gang related. I think that, sometimes we minimize the impact of the murder rate because we suspect that it's really mostly gang related. But when we now see the execution style murders taking place of ordinary citizens in this country, that is a point of alarm in this country. He also mentioned, and I agree with him wholeheartedly, that the Prime Minister offered nothing with immediacy. All the solutions are solutions that we know. Fixing up police stations, replacing police vehicles, and I emphasize replacing, not talking about adding, replacing old vehicles with new vehicles, which is great. But given where we are, doesn't have the sense of urgency that we're talking about. At this point, solutions themselves have become somewhat experts on the crime situation. And every single blog, everybody you speak to, everybody says the same thing. Too many guns being made available. So when the Deputy Prime Minister would say that St. Lucia doesn't produce guns, was that to suggest that it's somebody else's fault as to why there's so many guns in St. Lucia? We have to do a better job at our borders. What are those things? Scanners. Every time that we try to put scanners in place just to deal with barrels, far less scanners that are much more expensive to deal with containers, those scanners are sabotaged. And that's why canine dogs were brought in here. Who would have imagined that the saboteurs of the canine dogs would be our own government?
Wow.
By simply not wanting to pay for the dogs and their handlers and to ensure the independence of those canine dogs. So it's not only at the border, but even when they're going through neighborhoods in search of arms, the dogs are much better because the persons who are in possession of guns I want to ask, has the decision to allow Venezuelans into St. Lucia requiring a visa, has that been changed? So we know in past that many of the arms have been coming through transshipments through Venezuela. What policies can this government point to strengthen our border control? Because there's no point in going and getting a gun amnesty if in fact tomorrow people can bring a gun to replace that gun just as fast. So the first thing is you have to control your borders. The Martinicans, RSS, impacts all have a shared responsibility on this. I did not hear one statement from the Prime Minister that we were moving with any kind of expediency to shut down the borders. That there was going to be more patrols. These are the things that we speak of that take immediate effect. And Mr. Fade is 100% correct. There was nothing in the statement. This was a hurried statement, almost like he was pressured into having it and he felt, okay, let me just check the box before I go off to Taiwan to say I've had a speech. But the reality is the speech has actually done more harm than not having the speech in the first place. Because the speech sadly confirms to all of us there's no plan. The Prime Minister frequently blames all kinds of persons. When we had the rains and the rivers flooded, the fault was who? St. Lucians for dumping their stuff in the rivers.
Yeah.
Which is true. But the reality is if you were doing desilting, that stuff would have been removed. And a proper policy put in place to fine people for who are doing that, or to improve our solid waste collection so people would not have the need to do that. But we saw the same thing. Everything to do with crime, the Prime Minister points to corruption. Corruption in the police force, corruption over here, corruption over there. And if the Prime Minister wants to use corruption as an excuse, then it means that he has to do a better job and his cabinet and his government do a better job of setting the example. So when the concerns about Richard Frederick and his affiliation to activities in this country, when the US government has taken an unprecedented step of removing his visa permanently, and we saw in WikiLeaks, we've seen in letters that were written to his daughter by the State Department as to why his visa was revoked. And yet the Prime Minister has remained, and the Labour Party has remained silent. Whereas the Labour Party makes allegations about persons, we have hard evidence about the corrupt activity of Ernest Hilaire. One, in the Rovergate, where as a High Commissioner, he used his position and lied to all the authorities in order to benefit his brother, so his brother could get a duty-free car, and also to benefit himself. We have the hard facts of the opening of an account called the St. Lucia IMO account, of which we now know that permission was never sought by the Accountant General to open up the account.
Joint signatories.
We know that the joint signatories on the account were Ernest Hilaire as the High Commissioner and Dr. Jufali as the ambassador.
Correct.
We know for a fact, not guessing, we know for a fact that when the money arrived at £66,500, that money was never reported to the Ministry of Finance. So in essence, it acted as a slush fund outside of the consolidated fund. These are not speculation. All of the documentation to support these things are there. Yet, the Prime Minister says nothing. We know that there are other members in his cabinet which equally have been involved in suspicious and dubious activities that some people would call corrupt. We've seen that since they've come into government, the choice of hiring persons with criminal records, and I'm all for giving a person a second chance. But doesn't the Prime Minister understand the connection, that people are not perceiving it as a second chance, but speaking to it as a characteristic that you need to be involved in the Labour Party? So how can the pot call the kettle black in this instance? How can you be harboring criminals and to say nothing You speak of threats. And when there are clear examples in your own government of ministers and senior officers threatening people, you say nothing.
Nada.
Why is this important? This is important as how do you hold other people accountable when you're not prepared to hold yourself and your party accountable? How is it you're not wanting to lead by example in this regard? So I want to speak about critical issues that have to be resolved that now are becoming more glaring in light of where we are in our crisis. What is the state of impacts? Just before the elections, the DPP said that he was on the verge of laying charges and prosecuting cases involved in impacts. Why do I bring that up? Because we're going to need the help of the US. And if the government did not understand before, let me remind them now that the US's government willingness to allow the police force to obtain training that they had been denied was temporary on the basis that we were proceeding with those prosecutions. Not a word. Nobody's heard anything as to what the status of the impacts report are. And I'm going to say to you that I think the time is going by fast, and I would not be surprised if countries start putting more pressure on the government of St. Lucia, particularly given their history. And our police force need more support than ever before. The charges laid against Stanley Felix. It's a very serious issue. And the charges of tampering with witnesses, and we know the case that's involved, is very scary. And I want to know, how is it that nothing has proceeded? We've not heard anything more. And sadly, when we see that kind of situation taking place in St. Lucia, that we're not convinced anymore that silence means that somebody's working behind the scenes. Our confidence in the system is not such. And therefore, we have to put pressure on to understand what is the situation with Stanley Felix. All of these things are, sadly, examples of protecting the victory. That's what we're seeing right now. The lack of anything substantive in the Prime Minister's speech in a time of crisis. Protect the victory. Not allowing impacts to proceed, protecting the victory. Hushing up the investigation into Stanley Felix, protecting the victory. Alleging that there is corruption about everybody else without holding yourself accountable, protecting the victory. One of the things that's fueling and has the potential of fueling this crime wave is the state of the economy. Again, early in the year, we alerted the government as to supply chain issues and inflationary issues and what the impact was going to be on our economy. Prime Minister said he took our 6-point plan and threw it in the garbage and laughed. I'm here to say that you're trying to suggest in your last report that there's an inflation of 6% in St. Lucia. Let's look at some things. The gas price went from $13.95 to $17.95. Everybody buys gas. That's a 20% increase. Cooking gas, 20-pound cylinder, went from $31 to $44. That's over a 40% increase. This is a day-to-day item that affects everybody's life. Bus fares, another thing that impacts people. The fuel surcharge at Lucia, which is up in excess of 40%. These are fundamental things. The price at the grocery stores, and people are better than me, have given you multiple examples of goods that have gone up, some of them in excess of 50%. And the government wants to believe by reducing the 6% service charge is sufficient? Really? That's the solution to the problem? Other countries around the world have dramatically reduced the duty rate to reflect the fact that the CIF price, the cost of insurance and freight, have gone up. And so the government would have realized if you were getting a 20% duty rate on $1 for a good, and you were getting 20 cents, and if in fact now the cost of that good goes up to $1.50, look how much more money you're collecting. So why would the government not adjust the dutiable rate in order for them to keep the same amount of money they were going to get? Who does not understand that when you allow the price of goods that are already going up and you now multiply it by VAT and duties, that you're making it more expensive for people to survive? Mm-hmm. And there is nothing commensurate on the other side to support the people. Mm-hmm. And it's going to get worse. Because now, in addition to inflation and supply chain issues, there's a very strong indication that there's going to be a global recession. So you're now talking about interest rates going up, stronger dollar, and all of those things are now going to make it even more difficult for our export market to compete. We would have expected the government would have spoke about what's going on in construction. The housing projects that have been stopped, the Rodney Bay Road. That is an embarrassment, and it shows a lack of respect to the public of this country. That you would have made all kinds of allegations of corruption. A year and a half has gone by. You cannot point to one thing. You want to blame everybody else. I see the Minister of Infrastructure wanting to blame everybody else. He didn't know? You're telling me that he wasn't living in St. Lucia? His own ministry is the one that changed the location of the roundabout. That you had a fixed price contract of $15 million. If you hated Fresh Start so much, the greatest penance that you could have done to them is to force them to have completed the project for $15 million. You allow the project to be canceled, and now they're being paid for works done on the Ministry of Infrastructure's cost structure. And you now are going to have to find a new contractor. But in the meanwhile, imagine the thousands of hours of inconvenience and discomfort they have caused St. Lucians, and the embarrassment for all of us that our primary tourism sector looks like a ghetto. And if they themselves were not driving on the road, I maybe don't understand that, but they themselves, baby, all of them are driving on that road every day. Aye, nothing, no reaction. That is why people think, Philip here, that y'all are incompetent and that y'all are only interested in protecting the victory.
That's correct.
And whether people suffer in this country, it matters not. So if on a basic thing like that you cannot get it, how do you have any belief that people have confidence in your government to solve the crime problem, to solve the economic problem, to solve the social wars that we have in this country? Tourism. You have novices. I always believe in giving a person a try, you know. But you're talking about the biggest industry that we have in this country. Airlift to St. Lucia is being reduced as we speak. So what do I know? If there's not an airline seat to bring a passenger, that person cannot come, regardless of whether you have the hotel rooms or not. When was the last time you heard about a tourist board campaign or marketing? And like everything else in this country, no reports. We don't get a report on CIP. When was the last time the media or the public of St. Lucia was given a report as to how much money CIP earned, how much went into the economic fund, and how the money was spent? You remember they always used to be crying. We kept on telling them the money's in the consolidated fund and it's in the budget. They don't want to believe you. Today, the money is in an economic fund outside of the consolidated fund, of which they amended the bylaws to allow cabinet by themselves to approve the projects. A year and a half has gone by. We have not heard one word how much money has gone in and what projects are being financed and how the money is being spent. Where are we going? Agriculture. We all now know there is no more banana exports. You want to blame everybody else? You came in, successive governments understood the FTO did not have the capacity to manage the banana sector. And the people of St. Lucia were being taken up for a ride by FTO. Because every time that FTOs was not being paid the money in the UK, why? Because of the amount of spoiled bananas. So all those bananas that went to the UK, the transportation paid, the handling paid, and the ripening paid. When those bananas were rejected, that cost was deducted from how much the farmers were getting from the bananas. And the pressure was now being put on by the farmers for the government of St. Lucia to continuously subsidize the farmers. But the solution was to beef up the FTO so that we were not sending as many rejected bananas to the UK. You come in, you dismantle all of that. It's now collapsed. And you now want to come a year and a half later, after you said how you were going to recover the sector, you now want to come and blame the former administration. I'm saying this to say that we go down sector by sector. Manufacturing sector is down. It has to be down. If the cost of electricity has gone up, if the cost of bringing your inputs to be assembled have gone up, if in fact there's an oncoming recession, if in fact that we're pegged to the US dollar and therefore our goods have become more expensive, it must be down. What are you doing to fix it? So if tourism is down, if manufacturing is down, if agriculture is down, if you reduce construction, how can the economy be growing? And if the economy is not growing, what is the government doing to make up for the income shortfall and for the thousands of people who have been losing their jobs? The call centers. 2,000 people earning an average of $2,500 a month is $5 million of salaries alone in the South. A month. That's $60 million in just salaries. That doesn't include the bus fares and the food and everything else. During the middle of COVID, a crisis, when an opportunity came to expand the call center market, that's what the United Workers' Party did. And I got ITEL BPO to come here and added 1,500 new jobs to St. Lucia. Since this government has come in, have you heard about any new jobs in the call center market? In fact, when they were doing the opening, no official minister from this government went to the event. That's what you call putting people first? Now I want to change dramatically. And I want to bring up another issue that is a crisis in this country, and that is of St. Jude's Hospital. Now that the government has decided to go back to the original building, information that we had becomes relevant. So the first document is a letter, and this has been made public several times, but I'm happy to make it more public again to the media. This is a letter that was written by the permanent secretary to the then Prime Minister, Kenny Anthony, on March 30th, 2016. And remember, the elections was in June. And it says, request for direct award of contract to St. Jude's Hospital, reconstruction project, design and supervision, Halcro Group. Reference is made to the current contract between the Government of St. Lucia and Halcro Group Limited to facilitate the design, procurement, and supervision services associated with the St. Jude Hospital reconstruction project. This contract expires on March 31st, 2016. There were various delays with respect to the implementation of works, ranging from availability of funding to the remobilization of contracts. Also delayed was the approval of the Mexican grant to facilitate the completion of phase 2 of the building, which includes the construction of the morgue building. As such, there have been delays in the completion of phase 1 and 2 of the project, which is expected to result in the return of St. Jude's Hospital to its original location. When the government came into office in 2011, there was a discussion to fix up the old St. Jude's where the fire was, but immediately commenced the construction of a new hospital. A new hospital. And 3 locations were identified. So this idea of a new hospital is not anything new. It was this government, the Labour Party government under Kenny Anthony, that took over 2 years to make a decision what to do. And the final decision was to expand the existing facilities of St. Jude's and then to look at a newer building down the road elsewhere. Consequently, the revised completion date is estimated at September 2016, which would allow for transition to the new facility to commence by December 16th, 2016. So we're talking March. They're talking about the earliest that they could have moved into the hospital was December. It is expected that the defects liability period would, consequent upon the continuation of the works, there is need for continued supervision of the various works and suppliers' contract. Given the circumstances related to the need for completion and transition into the new facility, it would be practical to continue with the services of existing firm for supervision services, given that they are mobilized on site, familiar with the project design and process, and key information related to the implementation of over the life of the project. Additionally, a change in supervision consulting firm may result in additional delays. Halcro Group Limited has submitted the fee proposal highlighted in the table below to allow for successful conclusion of the project. The new award result revised estimate design supervision services of $15 million. The total project cost is estimated at $178 million, with a supervision cost of 8.7%. This ratio is above the recommended range of 6 to 8% for the design of the supervision of the project. However, the fee included procurement of supplies for the various works, contracts, as well as for equipment and furniture in the hospital can therefore be justified on the basis. Therefore, in accordance with the powers conferred on you as Minister of Finance of the Procurement Stores Regulations contained in Finance Administration Act, well, the Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs, Planning and Social Security, Department of Planning and National Development recommends 1. Award of a fixed price lump sum contract to Halcro for $4 million. So the important part here is that it was estimated that it was going to cost another $100 million to finish the project. We then had the benefit of the St. Jude Hospital Reconstruction Project handover report. And this was done by a lady called Shanta King. And this report was done on the 14th of August 2016. And remember, the elections was in June. This report speaks to chaos. If you go to page 10, this is important. It should be noted that the period of 5 years, January 2011 to December 2015, the St. Jude Hospital Project Management Unit, so that was a unit that was in the Ministry of Economic Development specifically to manage St. Jude's, provided administrative support for the water rec sector reform project in Dennery and Vieux Fort. For a period of 1.5 years, there was a dedicated project officer for water, after which all the staff of St. Jude Hospital Reconstruction Project had to fulfill a dual role for both projects. Despite the request for replacement of staff and recruitment of additional staff to meet the demands of the projects, this was not approved, and as such, this posed an additional burden on the PMU staff. The water projects were transferred to the Ministry of Sustainable Development in December of 2015. And it goes on, and it speaks about how much money was collected. For the project. So I want to take certain extracts from the Shanta King report. First of all, they indicated that they were working with Accreditation Canada to help design the hospital to standards. Guess when the contract started? July of 2016. And the election was in June. So up for the 5 years, there was no dialogue taking place with any entity with regards to the standards of St. Jude. The final inventory of equipment was not completed. No financing had been secured for additional equipment. Funds made available were inadequate, and work on the site was restricted. 2014 and 15, no funds for the project were planned. Cost increases as prices increased from 2013. Total expenditure as of August was $100 million, and that did not include a reconciliation of the account. When the account was finally reconciled, the expenditure on the project by the SLP government up until June of 2016 was $130 million. No DCA approval as of July 2016. Now, I bring that up because that is the building that the government wants to move into. And in addition to that, when we came into government, we hired a company called FDL. FDL is the #1 engineering firm that the Caribbean Development Bank uses. He does work not only in St. Lucia, they do work not only in St. Lucia, but throughout the length and breadth of the Caribbean. And he produced a report which is 270 pages long and identifies all of the professional people that did the review. Here's what his findings were. That there were 25 structures and there were 8 additional structures that were being proposed. The team had no experience in hospital design. That's the team at the government's unit. And the team that Halcro had put together, nobody had any accreditation in hospital work, and some of them did not even have the accreditation for what they were being paid to do. $118 million in contracts were issued and direct awards. $82 million was certified and paid, and they had outstanding payments of almost $40 million. There was a poor design of layout, buildings, and poorly placed. Corridors were too narrow. No plans for expansion. So if you had the 100 rooms, 100 beds, if you wanted to expand, there was nothing incorporated in the design that would have allowed it to be expanded. Bad planning for fire. Incorrect internal wall and floor materials for a hospital. Inadequate standards. Poor choice of equipment and expansion of capacity. And the estimate to complete the project was $100 million, but that was with the proviso that when they had to break down some of the walls, that they would not find more problems. I mean, this is a building in which the roof that they had not even operationalized had been replaced 3 times. And that is the building that you want to go into? And I'm putting the government on notice now. And I'm putting the Development Control Authority, who my understanding is, have already told the government how difficult it is going to be to get planning approval. And the opposition will be watching this very closely. And if we have to go to the courts to make sure that this project is done properly and going to be protecting the people of this country, we will do it. Because we know that the building as it's currently designed and constructed cannot meet DCA approvals. How can you have a ceiling of 7 feet? By the time you put the drop ceiling in, it's 6 feet. So a person like myself would have to bend down to walk through the hospital? We know the electrical problems, they use the wrong material, so it means they have to go and dig up the walls to get out all the electrical materials, or you're going to have to use trunking now on a modern building. And what is even more egregious is that in order to protect the victory, that you would try to diminish the building, the new building that was being designed and has been built, and you want to say to the people of St. Lucia that it's only 70% ready? When we knew that within 4 to 5 months, with an expenditure of $40 million, that we could have completed downstairs and operationalized it where there would have been 90 beds and we'd have been able to transfer the people over? You want to suggest to the people of St. Lucia, because it's not fully completed upstairs, that somehow that's going to prevent from downstairs? What's not completed upstairs? The drywalls. And why would you not complete the drywalls upstairs? Because you don't know what you're going to use it for. And the same people you have spraying there to get rid of mold, the building that was being designed took into consideration climate change in this country. Meaning what? It's getting hotter and hotter on the outside, which means that the difference between the cold air on the inside and the hot wall outside is what's creating the humidity. And that humidity is the biggest contributor to mold. We are heading in a disaster in this country. We're seeing contraction in the economy, no solutions. We're seeing what's taking place in crime, no solutions. We're seeing a government that is running out of time in the blame game. How many more times are you going to come and say you have a report to show corruption and you cannot provide it? And people are now becoming clearer and clearer about your own hypocrisy and your need to account for yourselves. This Labour government seems to be more obsessed with the opposition than they are with running the country. And again, they could not have more adequately described their own policy, protecting the victory. It is never about putting the people first. And I want to say lastly, that we noticed that they have laid the bill for the CCJ. There's been no effort by this government to educate and inform people in this country about what's up. And the people of this country, whether you support the Labour Party or whether you support the United Workers' Party, need to appreciate it on this particular circumstance, not allowing the people of this country to make the final determination if we go to the CCJ, particularly with the kind of behavior that we're seeing taking place. That the only thing that this government will respond to is the People's Parliament. And prior to the decision being made and the debate taking in Parliament, we will ask for a significant public protest in which we come out collectively to say to this government, no, you must have a referendum. When you go and read the constitutional report by the committee, it clearly states that revisions to the Constitution should be accompanied by a referendum. You want to use some court decision that there was a typographical error as to why you don't have to have a referendum? But meanwhile, other countries of similar history have referendums? The people of St. Lucia, we need to wake up. This government has continuously showed that when they talked about being prepared to be in government, they weren't speaking the same language as us. They were prepared to come into government and to protect themselves. That's what we see. It's not about putting people first. It's about putting themselves first. And if we don't check ourselves, if we don't realize that we have to participate in our democracy to protect our democracy, then we're giving the Labour Party a free hand to do as they please. And we've seen that the discretionary decisions that they're making are not in the interest of our country and not in the interest of independently minded people in this country. And that there is a select group of people that are benefiting. All the allegations that they made against United Workers' Party, and me in particular, they are exercising those things. Just look at the people they've appointed. I've said, our democracy is a very sacred thing. You're telling me that you're going to appoint Rene St. Rose, who is a lawyer that only has ever represented labor when it comes to political matters. She's never represented anybody from the United Workers' Party. Who is a hardcore labor supporter, and you're going to allow that person to become chairman of our electoral commission. It's a sad day. And you would do it under the idea that because you take the literal translation of the Constitution, that the Governor General can appoint the person in their own estimation. When it says that, it's even more significant that the Governor General know that the person that they're appointing is independent, because there already is a person that's appointed by the advice of the Prime Minister. There's a person appointed on the advice of the leader of the opposition. And so the chairperson has to be neutral. Other than the justice system, I don't know of one institution that is more important to our democracy than the Electoral Commission. It is something that we all have to have confidence in. So, again, to St. Lucia, the opposition is going to stay vigilant. We're going to stay active. But at the end of the day, our success can only be realized if, in fact, the people of this country realize that Parliament itself is not democratic. It's a process. I accept the process. But the reality is, unless the people come out and participate in the People's Parliament, this government will succeed in protecting their victory. Thank you.
Thank you very much there to the leader of the opposition. We want to thank you, the members of the press, for coming out. We want to thank you on Facebook and all of our platforms for coming as well. Now, before we close, I think I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. The press may have some questions. So if this is where we take them. Just in the event that you do, just show of hands and we'll call on you and we'll take it from there. If not, we will end. Okay? Hot 7.
Yeah, so recently, Dr. Justin and I returned from a trip from WENA, the Middle East and North Africa, in terms of identifying the prospects of offering our CIP program in that region. I know you spoke about the CIP earlier, but I just want to know your opinion on us trying to go into that market. Do you think that's a good thing, or do you think there should be some other markets we need to penetrate?
Mr. Political Lead.
Yeah, look, we had already started initiations in Africa and in the Middle East. These are very active markets. So wherever there is, sadly, instability, both economically and politically, those become very attractive markets. But I think as a government based in the West, we must be mindful of our own partners. So what we don't want to do, so for instance, when we had the situation with Russia earlier in the year, if in fact that there are policies against Russians, and we saw that many Russians may want to find an alternative citizenship, globally all the citizenship per country shut down. It was interesting to note it took St. Lucia a longer time to reach that position. So I think that CIP globally is fair game. My bigger concern, to be honest with you, is that in a year and a half we've received no reports. How many passports have been sold? How much money has been collected? How much money has been transferred into the economic fund, which is not in the consolidated fund? And how has that money been spent? Especially considering that Cabinet now has given itself the permission to spend it how it wants to. As I said to you, it went from an economic fund to a slush fund.
But you haven't said exactly what you're planning to do or what you have to, or what's being said. What exactly are you looking to do?
A great question, Jerry. And so the answer to that question is the continuation.